Have you seen what they've done to your song? This is where my heart is. Gospel music. There's no music like gospel music, number one, because it speaks of him. And Albertina.
In 1983, she thought she had finally found peace. After decades of struggle, sacrifice, and silent battles, Pastor Shirley Caesar married the man who felt like home. For a woman who had spent most of her life giving, serving, and surviving, it seemed like God had finally given her something just for herself. And for a while, it was real. The love, the partnership, the shared faith, it all felt unshakable. But more than 30 years later, when that man was gone, everything around her began to fall apart. The grief didn't come quietly. It tore through her life, and what followed wasn't just loneliness. It was betrayal, confusion, and a kind of heartbreak that no stage, no song, and no sermon could ever fully heal. Because after his death, something unexpected happened. The family she thought she had began to change. The people she had loved, helped raise, and supported slowly became distant. Disagreements turned into tension. Tension turned into conflict. And before she could even process her grief, she found herself caught in a painful battle over legacy, property, and trust. At the same time, the outside world wasn't any kinder. False stories began spreading online, claims about her health, her life, even her death. Imagine sitting in your own home, alive and breathing, while the world mourns you as if you're already gone. That was her reality. And the most painful part, it wasn't strangers who hurt her the most. It was family. But to understand how deep that pain runs, you have to go back to where it all began. Shirley Caesar was born on October 13, 1938, in Durham, North Carolina, into a family that knew struggle better than comfort. She was one of 13 children, 10 girls and 3 boys, living in a home where every single day was a fight to survive. There was never enough food, never enough space, and rarely enough peace. Her father worked long hours just to keep something on the table. But no matter how hard he tried, it always felt like they were one step behind. Still, there was one thing that filled that home with something stronger than poverty: music. Her father wasn't just a worker. He was a singer. On weekends, his voice carried through churches and small gatherings, bringing hope to people who needed it just as much as he did. And without realizing it, young Shirley was watching, listening, and learning. Her mother, despite dealing with her own physical struggles, held the family together with a strength that couldn't be explained. She turned nothing into something, over and over again, just to make sure her children survived. But everything changed in a single moment. Shirley was only 7 years old when her father suddenly collapsed and died. There was no warning, no time to prepare. One moment he was there, and the next he was gone. And just like that, childhood disappeared. In a house already struggling to survive, his death created a void that couldn't be filled. That's when something inside Shirley shifted. She didn't have the luxury of grieving like a child. Instead, she made a decision, one that no child should ever have to make. She would help her family survive, and the only way she knew how to do that was with her voice. At just 7 years old, Shirley Caesar began singing in churches, not for applause, not for passion, but for survival. Every note she sang carried responsibility. Every performance meant food, meant survival, meant hope. While other children played, she worked. While others cried, she stood strong. Her voice became more than a gift. It became a lifeline. By the time she was 10, people were already stunned by what they heard. Her voice didn't sound like a child's. It carried weight, emotion, and something deeper that people couldn't explain. They called her Baby Shirley, but there was nothing small about what she could do. Sometimes she had to stand on boxes just to be seen. But the moment she sang, the room belonged to her. But talent didn't protect her from struggle. As a teenager, Shirley traveled across the South, often alone, performing in places that weren't always safe or welcoming. She faced long nights, empty pockets, and people who took advantage of her. Some would pay her almost nothing after she gave everything on stage. Others made promises they never kept. But she kept going, because going back wasn't an option. At home, things were just as heavy. Her mother's health continued to decline, and Shirley became more than just a daughter. She became a caregiver. She helped her mother move, dressed her, supported her through daily life, all while continuing to sing and travel to keep the family afloat. It was a weight that never left her shoulders. Even when success came later, she never walked away from that responsibility. Then, in her late teens, something happened that would change the direction of her life forever. She experienced something she couldn't explain, a moment so powerful, so personal, that it shook her completely. It wasn't a crowd. It wasn't a performance. It was a calling, a voice that felt bigger than anything she had ever known, telling her that her life had a purpose beyond what she could see. And she listened. She walked away from the path people expected her to follow, and stepped into something uncertain, but deeply meaningful. That decision led her to join one of the most influential gospel groups of the time, where she didn't just fit in, she stood out. On stage, Shirley Caesar was different. She didn't just sing, she felt everything. She moved, she cried, she shouted, she connected. Her performances weren't controlled or polished. They were real. And that raw energy changed everything. Audiences couldn't ignore her. She wasn't just performing music, she was living it. But behind the scenes, the reality was still harsh. She worked harder than most, yet earned less. She gave more, yet received less. The industry wasn't fair, especially to someone like her. But she endured it, pushing forward until she reached a breaking point. And then she made a bold decision. She walked away. Going solo wasn't just risky, it was dangerous for her career. People warned her, told her she wouldn't survive alone, told her she needed the group. But Shirley believed in something bigger than fear. So she stepped out on her own. At first, the response was mixed. Some didn't understand her style. Others thought she was too emotional, too different. But there were also people who connected with her in a way they never had before. Because Shirley wasn't trying to be perfect, she was telling the truth. And truth has power. As her career grew, so did her influence. She broke barriers, crossed into spaces where gospel music had rarely gone before, and brought a new level of emotion and honesty to her work. She wasn't just building a career, she was creating a legacy. But success didn't protect her from pain. Years later, after building a life filled with purpose, she found herself facing one of the hardest moments of her life, the loss of her husband. The man who had stood beside her, supported her, and shared her journey was suddenly gone, and the silence he left behind was overwhelming. But what came next was even harder. The family she thought would stand together began to fall apart. Disputes over property, leadership, and legacy created deep divisions. The stepchildren she had loved like her own became distant. The bond they once shared was replaced with tension and disagreement. And for Shirley, it wasn't just about the conflict. It was about the heartbreak of losing people she never expected to lose. At the same time, the world outside was watching and judging. False rumors began spreading online, stories claiming she was sick, dying, or already gone. Videos, posts, and headlines that had no truth behind them, but still reached millions. She had to come forward, again and again, to prove she was alive. Think about that. Having to remind the world that you're still here. And as if that wasn't enough, accusations began to surface. Claims about money, about misuse, about things that didn't reflect who she was. Investigations followed, pressure built, but in the end, the truth came out. She had done nothing wrong. Still, the damage remained, because even when you're proven innocent, people remember the accusation more than the truth. Through all of it, Shirley Caesar didn't stop. She kept showing up, for her church, for her community, for the people who still believed in her. She continued to give, financially, emotionally, spiritually, even when she was the one who needed support. But behind the strength, there was a quieter truth. For someone who had spent her entire life surrounded by people, she often felt alone. She had given so much to others, her time, her voice, her money, her love. But the one place she hoped would always feel safe, her own family, became the place that hurt her the most. And maybe that's what makes her story so heartbreaking. It's not just about poverty, or loss, or rumors, or fame. It's about a woman who gave everything she had to the world, and still had to fight for peace in her own life. Because sometimes, the hardest battles aren't the ones you fight in public. They're the ones you carry in silence, long after the music stops.